So let's talk about Creed 3 and the Creed Trilogy as a whole, and how it stands in as part of the greater Rocky saga, and in some ways in comparison and contrasting it to it. This is a full spoiler review. Don't listen on if you plan on seeing the film and haven't yet, because I'll just go into everything. I don't really have a plan for how this review will go. They just kind of turn on the microphone, start rambling, see what pops out of my dumb skull. But my first instinct is that this is possibly by a slight margin the weakest of the Creed trilogy, to some extent because of the having a Rocky Balboa himself missing kind of robs it of a certain emotional impact, although at the same time it does kind of free it up. You know, the Rocky films really, let's face it, have been to some extent about, I'd say have actively been about aging, becoming irrelevant, even heading into death, losing one's friends to death and old age and disease. To some extent, to an active extent since Rocky V, absolutely, right? And that movie came out 33 years ago. And Rocky Balboa, obviously, that film is almost entirely about aging, that those themes kind of recede to the background in Creed and Creed 2. But they're very present. Especially with this whole cancer story in Creed 1. Creed 2 kind of actually probably put it on the back, funnily enough, because the Rocky himself is older than ever in that film. Put those aspects on the back burner a little bit compared to Creed and Rocky Balboa and even Rocky 5. But I think it's too bad we had to get old is uttered for the first time in the end of Rocky 3. And, Rocky 4 has a ton of dialogue about, he is too old to fight, and hell, even Creed 3 without Rocky, and it still has, they're talking about, it's a few years past, Donnie's prime, right? And they even say about Dame Anderson, he's older than you are. So we, even when we move on from Rocky, aging is still just instantly a theme again, right? But, I do think that having Rocky missing does kind of rob it of a certain emotion. And also, arguably, the fight scenes are not quite as sharp. I don't know if that's has anything to do with, Michael B. Jordan's skill as director, as a brand new director, obviously, although I think he does prove perfectly capable. And I'm not saying the fight scenes are bad. I was engaged by all of it, but maybe not quite as engaged as I was with the fights throughout the previous films, at least the main fights, the big four fights in the middle and end of each film, which would be Donnie versus Leo in Creed, Donnie versus Pretty Ricky at the end of Creed, and then the two Creed Drago fights in Creed 2. Compared to those, again we have a quick starting fight with Creed and Pretty Ricky, but the two main fights are Felix versus Dame and then Dame versus Creed. Not, if I was to rank the 6 main fights of the franchise, those would probably come in 5th and 6th place for me. Just in terms of kind of although they do try to make the filmmaking more, and they go a little experimental at the end. All that said, well, I think it probably was the weakest by a little bit. It more than passed the time. It was a perfectly engaging and entertaining 2 hours. I think most movies are basically competent these days, just because they go through so many layers of quality checks and a million talking heads and suits looking over it. So I feel like true incompetence usually doesn't hit the big screen as much these days compared to 20 years ago. And I'm thinking we had the likes of, the Tim Burton Planet of the Apes, right? And, the Triple X movies, right? Your Paycheck, a lot of crap like that. But I feel like, but it's not just competent. It definitely rises above the level of competent to the level of very solid and entertaining. And I do think it's good to see what is ultimately a drama, an action drama to some extent, but ultimately a kind of human stakes level driven dramas do so well at the box office and succeed. But nothing about the Donnie Bianca dynamic stood out to me that much this time around. If anything, I feel like, obviously there's always been kind of a romance film aspect to the Rocky franchise, especially Rocky 1, which I would say it's kind of the theme of the thing you gradually realize through the film as we build up to him shouting Adrian's name after the fight at the end, is that that was what the movie was really about, more so than it was an action film on any level. And then not Creed 2, Rocky 2 in particular, the first half of it is very Rocky Adrian centric. So Rocky 1 and 2 really romance films as much as anything else. They're the masculine way to enjoy a romantic film, right? By watching your Rocky. That aspect recedes kind of as they go on. Rocky 3 and 4 particularly become more action films. I'd say this trilogy has to some extent always been a little bit more on the Rocky 3 and 4 level, where just like Adrian, Bianca's important, but it's always been the core of the Rocky films, at least Rocky 1 and 2, was kind of Rocky and Adrian. Arguably, Rocky 3, the core was kind of Rocky and Apollo. But here I always felt like the core dynamic in Creed 1 and 2 was Adonis and Rocky. That was what, I was at least more invested in. I can't speak for everyone, in particular, people who are maybe younger and probably came to this. I mean, I'm sure there is at least some existing fan base of people who've only watched Creed 1, 2, and 3 and haven't even bothered to go back to the Rocky films. Although there's probably a larger contingent, I would assume, of people who watched Creed and enjoyed it, then went back to watch Rocky. So I don't know how those fans might respond to it, but at least to me, in terms of what grabbed my interest, it was the Rocky Creed, the Adonis Rocky dynamic. But obviously we don't have that this time around. In fact, there's only, I believe, one actual reference to Rocky in the movie. There was another one in the trailer, actually, that didn't make the cut, I guess. I do feel like this film probably got trimmed down a little bit in the edit bay, and I would be interested to see, if not a longer director's cut version, at least deleted scenes. But anyway, what I was saying is the core of this film definitely feels like it's the Donnie Dame dynamic, and it is very well done. It's the Michael B. Jordan and Jonathan Majors. I've heard this Jonathan Majors is hype for so long now, but it's funny, after all the hype, I never saw a single episode of Lovecraft Country. Never saw any of the other movies he was in. Didn't see Ant-Man 3. Didn't watch Loki or whatever else he is. So this is the first, after hearing years of hype about him, this is the first time I've ever actually seen him. But I was impressed with the screen presence and the physical presence in the fight scenes. But yeah, the dynamic was very good. Kind of this weird, little Goku Vegeta dynamic, right? That's you see any rivalry, that's how you have to think of it. A little Ash Ketchum, Gary Oak dynamic, right? But it was obviously a completely different dynamic than Adonis and Rocky. No father figure, no mentorship, friendship, rivalry, frenemyship. But it was quite well done, and I was fully engaged by that in a way that the Donnie Bianca dynamic was kind of like, it's fine. It's whatever. I have no particularly strong opinions on it. I did like the dynamic between Adonis and the daughter, the deaf daughter. I'm not quite sure why we watched the daughter being born on a screen a few years ago. Now she's like 10 years old. I don't quite know what that's about. But then again, that's a little bit of a Rocky saga tradition, because we previously had Rocky going to train in Russia and fight Ivan Drago for a few weeks, right? And then come back, and the son has aged, 5 years throughout this few week trip between Rocky 4 and Rocky 5. So I guess these strange time, that's the Rocky universe. We have to accept that there's weird cosmic energies that cause time to fluctuate. Just no one talks about it, but it is actually a science fiction universe. So that's why the daughter is 10 years old now. But I did like that character and all the sign language dialogue and stuff like that, kind of silent sequences. That was really is good to see. It was a neat dynamic. So I guess of the three dynamics, Donnie and Dame and Donnie and his daughter, the Donnie Bianca would probably be the least interesting to me of the film. But Diamond Dame Anderson, very cool antagonist. I think, honestly, the whole series has had a good antagonist the whole way through, save maybe Tommy Gunn and George Washington Duke. But, Rocky 5 is considered a bit of a outlier for a reason. Mason the Line Dixon and Rocky Balboa didn't stand out to me as much. He's more plot device than character, I felt like. But, obviously Apollo Creed, Clubber Lang, both Dragos, even Pretty Ricky. He is also maybe on the lower end, but always good antagonists. And I would put Dame Anderson, if not above Victor Drago, definitely above Pretty Ricky. It was even compared to, it was kind of hard, you talk about the Rocky saga, much of it is meant to be unconvincing underdog stories. I did find Diamond Dame's first fight being against the heavyweight contender, at least of the world, Felix or whatever, or was he the champion? I can't remember. And him winning a little It's a little hard to buy, even compared to like Clubber Lang. We saw Clubber Lang coming up through the fighting ranks all through the beginning of Rocky 3, that great classic Eye of the Tiger montage, which is still a fantastic montage at the beginning of Rocky 3. So that kind of built Clubber up in a way that Diamond Dame going straight to the heavyweight champion of the world kind of felt like a little But you can't criticize the Rocky saga too much for this kind of thing. It's kind of built on these slightly unconventional rises to glory. But yeah, and I did think that the fight against between Dame and Felix in the middle of the film was very cool. I guess I'm slightly sadistic because I tend to really like the fights where our hero in this case, our hero's protege just gets completely creamed, right? Whether it's Rocky getting beat up at the beginning of at the middle of Rocky 3, or even Creed's battle against Victor Drago in Creed 2. I just kind of tend to like that thing, or even, in other sagas, like Batman getting the shit beat out of him by Bane in The Dark Knight Rises. I just like seeing the hero go down brutally. It's, definitely it's kind of I don't like going back to some of the older action films where the good guy is too triumphant and too cocky and too confident and too cool and too victorious the whole time. You gotta see the hero go down. So that was a good sequence. The end fight, I did like the setting in a baseball diamond. That was a good way to give it a distinct visual texture. And I like seeing the crowd of what looks like thousands of extras. Things got a bit strange as the fight went on. So I thought it was really effective and well done when we saw, the camera showed each fighter from the other fighter's point of view, and they're sitting in the corner between rounds, and we showed the young versions of them, the younger actors from earlier in the film. That was really well done. Then when they actually got up and started fighting with like the crowd not there anymore, little strange. Then when you start bringing in the cage match aspect and all the other abstract stuff, my wife looked at me in the theater and basically said, like, this is weird. So it wasn't just me. I think you could feel the energy in the in the movie theater, even not even a full movie theater. I saw it because I saw it a couple of weeks after release, even only like a third of the way full movie theater. You could feel kind of it was I respect that Michael B. Jordan trying to come up with a way to make things, give things a unique feel, a unique visual texture. Once the cage came down, it got a little too much, but it started really good, at least when they showed the young versions of each. I thought that was very effective, but iffy thoughts. But then once they got up again, the fight was pretty cool after that. It's again a fairly predictable. The good guy wins, which of course isn't how every movie in this saga ends. In fact, at the time Creed came out, of 7 movies, only 3 out of 7, less than half, it ended with our hero having a triumphant boxing match in the ring and felling his opponent at the end. Only Rocky 2, 3, and 4 had ended that way. Now Creed 2 and 3 have ended that way. So we've had 5 out of 9 films now end that way. So we're over the halfway point, but not massively so. But yeah, you kind of saw the end coming. Creed outfought Dame and re-attained the heavyweight champion of the world title. But it was a cool, I have no complaints about the action scenes besides that. The Pretty Ricky one was a little brief. But of course, the kind of a mid-movie tragedy, or slightly past mid-movie tragedy, I guess. It's a little bit of a tradition in this saga, most notably, of course, with the death of Apollo Creed in Rocky 4, but also Mickey in Rocky 3. I guess we haven't had anything like that since Rocky 4. The tragedies, namely the death of Adrian and Paulie, I guess, were both off screen. But yes, so we have Mama Creed dying, which is a big deal if you think about it, because the actress changed, of course, to the mom from the Cosby Show for the Creed trilogy. I cannot remember the initial actress's name in the Rocky movies, but even though the actress changes, is a character who I believe we first met in Rocky 2. Am I right in saying that? So what would that be, 1979? Is that right? So what, 44 years ago, if you kill off a character who has been an on-screen character for 44 years, that's a pretty big deal. I mean, I guess the closest comparison I can think of, not counting characters who've been rebooted and such, would be like killing off Princess Leia in Rise of Skywalker, 42 years after the initial Star Wars. But maybe less said about the Star Wars trilogy, the better, because I don't I don't think that a sequel trilogy holds together as well as the Creed trilogy, for sure. But yeah, that's a pretty big deal. I mean, I kind of saw it coming. In fact, literally the split second they referenced medical issues in the near the beginning of the film with her, I was like, oh, okay, she's dying later in this movie. I knew it quite instantly. But yeah, but it did work as a kind of motivation, and yeah, and then that brought us through to an effective climax of the end fight scene. I know it'd be fair to say that I did miss the presence of Rocky Balboa, but at the same time, it did kind of work with the end of Creed 2, because I thought the scene at the end of, because when I went to see Creed 2, I didn't know that, what's the actor's name who played his son in Rocky Balboa in Creed 2, Milo Ventimiglia, I believe that's his name. I might be pronouncing it wrong. I think it's Milo Ventimiglia. I had no idea he was in the movie. I had not heard that at all when I would see Creed 2. So when he actually showed up at the end, I was like, oh, that's great that they have not ignored Rocky Balboa. They had that continuity. So I had just kind of run with the assumption that Rocky doesn't even live in Philadelphia anymore, or the United States, much less Los Angeles, where all of this film is set, and that he now just probably moved to Vancouver to be closer to his son and grandson. That was my kind of how I interpreted it, how I kind of that was the assumption I was operating with. So admittedly, Rocky probably should have been at the funeral of Mrs. Creed. That would have made sense, but even if there's a cameo or something, but you know, it worked that our last scene with Rocky for now. Who knows what happened in Creed 4, Creed 5, Adonis Creed. What would that be? What's number 6 is called? Yeah, but the having Rocky's last scene be with his meeting his son and meeting his grandson for the first time, I guess, or first time lately anyway, and reuniting with his son at the end of Creed 2 worked well as an exit for the character. So that plot wise and in terms of Rocky's character arc, it did work for him to not be here, but it did feel kind of weird to a certain extent, you know, because yeah, there's I guess no character or actor continuity at this point from the original Rocky to here, which, you know, is that shocking for a series that's about to turn 50 years old? Not really, but you know, I compare it to something like a Cobra Kai, which also stems from a John G. Avildsen directed film. John G. Avildsen directed both the first Rocky and The Karate Kid. That's not quite as much later as the Rocky franchise. It's not almost 50 years later, but it is basically 40 years later with that series. And I compare it from the beginning of Rocky to now, we have zero continuity of actors. I think from the beginning of Karate Kid to where we are in Cobra Kai now, there's 12 or 13 actors still from the original Karate Kid trilogy still in these Cobra Kai series. So in comparison, I think it's kind of disappointing when you have no continuity of characters or actors whatsoever from the beginning to the end of a saga. So I do hope that, you know, if they make Creed 4, that Rocky comes back, even if it's like for like a one scene cameo, right? Just so we have that through line of continuity. And I did think that we didn't have Ludwig Göransson. Is that how you pronounce his name? Maybe not, but you know, I never claimed to be a master of pronunciation. We don't have him on the musical score anymore. And I did think I missed him because I did think that Creed had an outstanding, I think it was a big task to rise up to, meeting Bill Conti's work in the Rocky movies, that dun dun da 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 da. Yeah, my wonderful singing there. But yeah, I thought that Ludwig rose up to the task in Creed 1, because I remember walking out of the theater and I could clearly hear in my head the da 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 da. It was I wouldn't say he surpassed Bill Conti's Rocky score by any means. I don't think it's as iconic as that or could ever be, but it was very memorable from the first time I ever walked out of the theater 8 years ago after seeing Creed. This movie, not so much. I can't remember any of the music in it, so it did miss the contribution of Ludwig Göransson. One thing I think this movie did very well is that it had a great sense of internal history within the Creed trilogy, which is to say that we had Pretty Ricky Conlon back, and we had Victor Drago back. I like that the series has consistently kind of opened and closed brackets with Adonis's various rivalries. The one exception to this would be the fight with the Leo, whatever his name, started with an S, his last name, I can't remember, in the middle of Creed 1, which was the only major opponent anyway that he only fought once and beat on the first fight. But other than that, if you consider each loss kind of an opening of a bracket and each victory a closing of a bracket, so we have at the beginning of Creed 1, the opening of the bracket that is his loss to Danny Wheeler, And then at the end of Creed 1, the opening of the bracket that is lost by split decision to Pretty Ricky. And then we close that first bracket at the beginning of Creed 2 with his defeat of Danny Wheeler in the opening match, the opening fight. We open another bracket with his loss to Victor Drago in the middle of the film, close that bracket with his victory against Victor at the end of that film, and then finally close the bracket again with his defeat of Pretty Ricky Conlon at the beginning of this film. And I like that all those sequences kind of it's not just one open, one close, one open, one close. They kind of intercut, they interspace each other, they hug each other in various ways. We have various rivalries kind of operating at the same time. And then finally, this new rivalry opens up with the opening bracket that's not Donnie's loss to Dame Anderson, but Felix. But then we close the bracket later with Adonis coming in to beat him. And I like the way that all that kind of works. It really does make it feel not like disconnected films, despite the fact that all three films have a different director and a different main antagonist, and we don't even have Rocky in this one. They could run the risk of feeling like disconnected films, but they truly do feel like a trilogy because of that. And I liked Victor coming in to train, to help train, or not train, I guess, to spar with Adonis. You know, is slightly weird and unconvincing. Like his father's killer's son comes in to help, but it was nice to see him, and you know, it was a good thing. It, like these minor shades of, you know, Apollo training Rocky in Rocky 3, right, with Victor coming in to help Donnie train. So I did like that. And having that those presences of Ricky Conlon and Danny Wheeler and Victor Drago run kind of intercutting through three films truly does make it feel like a trilogy in a way that really works. Now, the exact opposite counterpoint to that is that I think the Creed films have a somewhat poor sense of greater Rocky universe internal history, which is to say that, like, for example, and this actually happened in Creed 2 also, but I noticed in this film at the beginning, they're talking about Muhammad Ali. Like they have a Muhammad Ali Rumble in the Jungle Ali versus Foreman tickets. And that kind of doesn't make sense because at the time that Muhammad Ali was on top of the boxing world in the Rio life, that's when Apollo Creed in the mid-70s was supposed to be the king of the boxing world in the Rocky universe. Apollo Creed is literally supposed to be Muhammad Ali. There's no way Muhammad Ali can exist in the Rocky universe. It doesn't make sense, right? And it'd be like if in the TV show The West Wing, if they referenced Bill Clinton in that universe, right? It's like, no. Josiah Bartlett replaces Bill Clinton in this universe. They cannot both exist. And that's why I felt the same way about referencing Muhammad Ali in these films. I'm like, no, Muhammad Ali literally can't exist in this universe. And they even reference like a Don King, I think, at one point in this film. And I'm like, it would be better if they referenced George Washington Duke, right? You can't just ignore Rocky V. It exists. Don't ignore it, right? And but I guess that's even true of the original Rocky films. So there's one scene where like Mike Tyson shows up at the side of the ring at the final fight, and I'm like, no, that should be Clubber Lang, right? I thought that was a little weird. It's like the first Creed film did the best with this because they did reference Mickey directly in dialogue and Paulie, and there was like a TV and news sports segment where they're talking about how Apollo Creed could be the best of all time. Then as soon as they mentioned Muhammad Ali and Creed 2, I'm like, no, that's not right. That can't be. It mustn't be. But, you know, this is a nerd nitpicking a sports franchise, nerd nitpicking a jock franchise, you know, but it doesn't undermine the movie too badly. It's just my sci-fi fantasy geek brain always grabs onto those little details like, no, your internal chronology, your internal continuity has to make sense. But then again, this is the series where 5 years just occasionally get added to children's ages with no rational real world explanation, so I guess I shouldn't worry about it too much. If this trilogy has a greater issue than that, I think it's the fact that it never at any point from the beginning of Creed 1 actually convincingly positioned Adonis as an underdog. I mean, the first scene in Creed 1, I think there's like a, you know, young kids flashback. But if I recall correctly, I haven't watched the movie in a few years, but isn't literally the first scene with adult Adonis him effortlessly winning like a fight in like one punch or something like that. Versus compare that to Rocky and Spider Rico's fight at the beginning of Rocky 1, we can see that Rocky is not really at the top of his game. And then actually that aspect with Creed 1 gets a little worse after that because there's right before Danny Wheeler beats up Creed as the number 2 pound for pound fighter in the world. Doesn't Creed go up against the number 6 like light heavyweight boxer in the world or something like that, and again beats him in like one punch? And this is after we see that Creed had a great job and lives in like a huge mansion and stuff like that. So I'm like, this is not an underdog character. I mean, I know that he's not as advanced in the boxing world as Ricky Conlan's supposed to be, but even so, doesn't compare at all to the feel of Rocky Balboa going up against Apollo Creed, which felt like, a gnat trying to fight a lion, right? Which is it's a true underdog story. I just said the name of the dodgeball movie, didn't I? A true underdog story. Whereas Creed 1 is more like, I don't know, a bloodhound going up against a Rottweiler or something like that. Yeah, the Rottweiler maybe has the advantage, but it's not quite the same because we saw how dominant Creed had been in the fighting game from like very beginning of Creed 1. So, I don't think and that kind of goes through to this movie where we have this character, Dame Anderson, who they say is getting out of jail, not fought for 18 years, at least maybe not outside of jail, is older than, Donnie. So, and going straight into the majors. So it's almost like it's this weird kind of reverse thing where our villain feels a lot more like the underdog than our hero in this movie. So, I don't know, Creed Trilogy does a ton of things really well, particularly Michael B. Jordan's performance, the fight scenes, like I said, the music, at least in the first films, just the general drama of it, well-written dialogue, etc. But the one thing I don't think it ever quite did as well as the Rocky movies and other underdog sports movies like the Karate Kid and so on is being an underdog sports story, because it never quite felt like that. Tried to and probably succeeded the most with I was going to say with Ricky Conlan at the beginning. No, it probably succeeded more with Victor Drago just because that actor is so fucking huge who plays him. But yeah, it never quite nailed it as an underdog story in the way that I think the best kind of sports dramas do. So anyway, what does the future hold? I mean, I'm assuming that if they do in fact make Creed 4 and so on with how well it's doing at the box office, I'm sure they'd like to. I'm assuming that it is completely Michael B. Jordan's franchise now. I know Ryan Coogler might still have some involvement on the writing or producing end, but yeah, I just assume that basically Michael B. Jordan owns the creative direction of this franchise from now on in terms of, all the major story decisions and directing choices. I feel like if they make Creed 4, it would be so difficult to have it be dramatically compelling or convincing or surprising if they just introduced another opponent who he's going to fight in a big fight at the end of the movie, right? But but that would be tricky because they tried to defy that in Rocky 5 and do something different, and it's everyone's least favorite movie. Everyone wants these movies to end with a boxing match in the ring. That's why 8 out of 9 of them have, and the one that did not is literally everyone, including Sylvester Stallone's least favorite of the franchise. So, yeah, I don't envy the ones who have to find a way to try to make a Creed 4 dramatically compelling and have be an action movie with cool fight scenes in it and still work dramatically. Never mind being in any way surprising or unpredictable, because I wouldn't have any idea how to do it. I would have no clue. That is a tricky one, but I have enjoyed 3 movies. Like I said, this one maybe slightly less than 1 and 2, which I both thought were excellent, but this one a little bit less. But I'm rooting for Michael B. Jordan to, prove me wrong and make a Creed 4 that blows everyone away. I will say one thing. I've heard people say they should bring back Rocky to kill him off. I don't know. I'm personally against it. I don't want to say that I enjoy lots of movies and lots of TV shows that end with killing off the major characters or even the main character, but after No Time to Die and after the Star Wars sequel trilogy, I don't know, I just kind of have had a little too much of that. I don't need to see every iconic hero of yesteryear killed off on screen. At a certain point, it's kind of it's just kind of depressing. It's no, Kylo Ren, I don't want to kill the past if I need to. I think that literally the only reason they should even consider that would be after Sylvester Stallone dies in real life. Then they could do it, right? And I'd be like, okay, that makes sense. But as long as Stallone is still alive, I don't think they should do that. I would like to see Rocky come back, even in a cameo capacity, but if it's as a, maybe not as major as you want in Creed 1 and 2, but, somewhere in between that and a one scene cameo, like, be in 4 or 5 scenes of the movie, I'd be on board. But yeah, no, I veto killing off Rocky. I cannot imagine pulling that off in a way that wouldn't just infuriate me. I would just be having all these bad flashbacks to No Time to Die and the Star Wars sequel trilogy. So I'm against it. But other than that, yeah, I mean, I'm on board, I guess, technically, if they make Creed 4. Yeah, I will see it. So, yep, that's enough rambling about Rocky and Creed for now. So I'll talk to y'all soon.